a lot of bad things have been happening in Ukraine for a long time. Nobody remembered any of them because of the war. But they've been a very anti-free speech, and they've been banning. Well, here's what Glenn Greenwald says. Ukraine's President Zelensky suspends 11 opposition parties using the same rationale Putin invokes when doing so, that they're subversive with ties to foreign enemies. One of the parties has 10% of the elected seats in Ukraine's parliament, and he just banned the party. So, all right. And also, Ukraine president bans 3 television channels. So you can't have opposition media. You can't have opposition parties. Okay. He tried 3 television stations. And now Ukraine has put out a list of bad journalists. This is it here. So this is it. And it's all in, is that Ukrainian? Is that the language they speak in Ukraine? Ukrainian? Okay. Looks very similar to Russian. But so they have a list, and they have a long list of journalists that are bad. And I thought for sure Aaron Mate was going to be on this with Max Blumenthal, and I was finger crossing it would be me too. I was just like, please. And if it's negative, they usually mention me, but they didn't. But here's who they mentioned. They mentioned this guy. This is John Jay Mersheimer. Now, if we've featured him on the show a lot, this guy tells the truth about Ukraine. He's a leading scholar on foreign policy or international politics, and he did a very, very popular video that's gotten millions and millions of views about how the United States and NATO is responsible for the Ukraine war. And he predicted that this would happen if the United States and NATO kept doing what they were doing. And of course it happened. And of course he gets put on that list. And he responded. So a newspaper reached out, a newspaper called unheard.com. They reached out, and this was his response to being included on this list of bad journalists. I'll show you a couple others. He says, when I was a young boy, my mother taught me that when others can't beat your arguments with facts and logic, they smear you. That is what's going on here. I argue that it is clear from the available evidence that Russia invaded Ukraine because the United States and its European allies were determined to make Ukraine a Western bulwark on Russia's border, which Moscow saw as an existential threat. Ukrainians of all persuasions reject my argument and instead blame Vladimir Putin, who is said to have been bent on conquering Ukraine and making it part of a greater Russia. But, he says, but there is no evidence in the public record to support that claim, which creates real problems for both Kiev and the West. So how do they deal with me? The answer, of course, is to label me a Russian propagandist, which I am not. So that was pretty. Any comment on that guy, Aaron?
Yeah, he's an eminent scholar who's been proven repeatedly right for a very, very long time. And because the academy is filled with cowards and sellouts, occasionally when someone like Mersheimer gets through and breaks out and becomes very prominent in their field, which he is, political science, he creates a problem. Much like Stephen F. Cohen, the late scholar, he was a problem because he was at Princeton, NYU, very eminent, wrote some really important scholarship on the history of the Soviet Union. And when he started speaking out against the new Cold War, he was slandered with the exact same names. It was, he was called, there's all these hit jobs on him. And so now they're doing the same thing to Mersheimer. And so no surprise at all that the Ukrainian government would want to try to put him on their target list. That means he's doing his job.
Look who else they singled out. They singled out Glenn Greenwald. And they say he's a bad journalist. This is Ukraine saying this. And Glenn responded by saying, war proponents in the West and other functionaries of Western security state agencies have used the same tactics for decades to demonize anyone questioning the foreign policy of the United States and NATO. Chief among them, going back to the start of the Cold War, is accusing any dissident of spreading Russian propaganda or otherwise serving the Kremlin. That is all this is from the Ukrainians, just standard McCarthyite idiocy. The Ukrainians have the absolute right to pursue whatever war policies they want, but when they start demanding that my country and my government use its resources to fuel their war effort, then I, along with other Americans, have the absolute right to question that policy or to point out its dangers and risks. I don't care at all about Ukraine's attempts to shut down debate in our country by smearing journalists and politicians who are questioning U.S. NATO policy as being Russian propagandists. That tactic is as inconsequential as it is cheap, tawdry, and discredited. Well said, Glenn. And here's two more. So Ray McGovern, who we've never had Ray on the show, but he's fantastic. He's been a truth teller from inside the intelligence community, and he's been demonized for it. Also, Caleb frickin' Maupin, our good friend Caleb Maupin, he gets Ukraine government singles him out. He's got to be doing a high five victory lap. Oh my God! So good for you, Caleb. Here's some more people. Scott Ritter, he's been on the show. He's the one who debunked the yellow cake. Tulsi Gabbard, she's on this.
She's a bad journalist.
She's a bad. Also, Jeffrey David Sachs. Now we've featured him on the show many times. He told the truth about Syria on MSNBC, which that was the only time that happened. And then he was able. He also told the truth about the virus being started in a U.S. biolabs, the coronavirus or COVID. He's the head of the Lancet study group on or commission on the COVID-19 and its origins, and he made a statement that he's pretty certain that it developed from a U.S. biolabs. So that's where COVID came from. Your government helped invent it, and then they sell you what do? They sell you the solution. They invent a problem, and then they sell you a solution, and that solution's worth a couple $100 billion. You know what that's called, by the way? That's called a scam. So that's all the ones I picked out, ones that people would notice. There's a whole list of them, but these are the ones, and I can't believe they left me and you out, Aaron. It hurts my feelings. Any last words on this?
Well, I just love how this conflict, this proxy war with Russia, is framed by the Biden administration as a struggle between democracy versus autocracy. And so we have to fund Ukraine's war with billions of dollars so that we can defend democracy. And what does Ukraine do in return? It bans our journalists.
It gets rid of democracy. We got to defend their democracy that they are dismantling. Come see our stand-up comedy. We'll be in Los Angeles, Bakersfield, Indianapolis, Louisville, Cincinnati, Tulsa, Oklahoma City, Detroit, lots more. Go to jimmydorcomedy.com for a link for all our tickets.